So these are very easy to make. 1 pound of butter, 3 cups of light brown sugar, and 1 cup of regular sugar. And cream the butter and sugar together. And then you add 4 large eggs into the creamed butter and sugar. These are farm fresh eggs. Add the eggs one at a time. Right out of my hen house. Let that mix up while you sift 3½ cups of all-purpose flour with 1½ teaspoons of salt. As I showed you before, this is what they look like. And this is mine. I'm going to take it away.
Hello, Mr. Shen. Or should I say, Officer Shen.
Sleeping Dogs, one of the most underrated and overlooked games of last generation. Releasing on August 14th, 2012, Sleeping Dogs was received with critical fondness, but not the popular reception to match, which is just an absolute injustice. If racing around contemporary Hong Kong as an undercover cop, roundhouse kicking gangsters, and climbing the ladder of the Sun On Yee triad doesn't sound like a great time, I'm not sure what I can do for you. It's a premise for an open world game like this that is unique and instantly compelling. But how does it live up to that concept and my lofty claims? To find out, let's take a good look at Sleeping Dogs. Sleeping Dogs starts off simply for a crime-centric open-world game. You take control of Wei Shen as he heads to Victoria Harbor for a routine drug deal. As always seems to happen in media, the deal goes south, resulting in a parkour chase and Wei getting arrested. While waiting in a group cell, Wei runs into his childhood friend Jackie Ma, a 2-bit gangster wannabe desperately chasing initiation into the Sun On Yee, one of the prominent triads in Hong Kong. They shoot the shit and Wei tells Jackie to get in touch with him if they ever need help with some work. Then Wei is taken to be interrogated by Jane Ten, a Hong Kong police officer that is important later, as well as Penju, the superintendent of the Hong Kong Police Department, who reveals that Wei is an undercover cop and will be set free. After being released, Wei uses his connection with Jackie to get work for the Sun On Yee through the Red Pole Winston Chu, who leads the Water Street Gang faction of the Sun On Yee, but is struggling through a conflict with the Red Pole Dog Eyes Lin, the leader of the Jade Gang faction, also of the Sun On Yee. From there, the story really kicks off into a sprawling story of personal vendetta-fueled murder, betrayal, large-scale assaults, and climbing the ladder of the Sun On Yee. Along the way, Wei Shen struggles with his split life, torn between his obligation for justice through his career and the personal connections and investment that grows through his involvement in the Water Street Gang. Not even the player knows where Wei really stands, and the connection he builds with the characters and consequential reluctance to turn them in mirrors the feelings of the player. Whether it's Winston's fiancée Peggy or the endearing ineffective Jackie, the conversations you watch as you drive them around and in cutscenes really flesh out the characters, and it allows you to empathize with people that do objectively terrible things. On the cop side of things, Wei arranges to help Tang with investigations along the way that often strengthen his position within the Sun On Yee by eliminating competition. Periodically throughout the story, Wei also meets with Raymond, his handler from the Hong Kong police that was strongly opposed to Wei going undercover to begin with. These brief meetings are more often than not screaming matches between the two, and serve to show just how torn Wei is between his two allegiances. As the story progresses, it steadily climbs in scale and intensity. You start off collecting protection money at a night market, move on to attacking drug storehouses, and it continues to escalate into ways wrapped in firefight car chases, torture scenes, and all-out gang shootouts. But the story also escalates emotionally. The scaling increase of action matches how emotionally centric the story becomes. As the conflict between Winston and Dog Eyes takes off, it crosses the boundaries of honor with a wedding assault, a shootout at a funeral, chopping people into soups and then feeding them to their friends. It gets incredibly dark and completely flies off the rails. But this complicated nature of the story also seeps into the mechanics. Wei has multiple skill trees: Triad, Police, Face, and Melee. Each one is leveled up differently, and is focused on rewarding the player with different bonuses to aspects of the player experience. The Triad skill tree splits into 2 branches, and you level it up by damaging vehicles, performing environmental kills, and completing combos during missions. The 2 Triad trees focus on melee combat, and giving you some cool new moves to do in fights. The Police tree is the inverse, both in how it gains experience by not committing property damage or hurting innocents during missions, and how the tree gives you skills focused on firearms and improving the other abilities Wei has outside of melee combat. The Face and Melee trees are both handled a bit differently. The Face skill tree is a stand-in for your reputation in the city. It's a linear tree that you level up from doing side quests and events you find in the open world. Not only does increasing your face level grant you access to better clothing options at stores, but the skills also buff the effects of your face meter in combat, more on that later, and increase the benefits from buying food and other services you can find around the city. The Melee skill tree grants you various new moves and combos to do in combat, but the real special part is how you unlock them. Early in the game, while taking an American tourist on a date, also more on that later, you reunite with Wei Sensei from his childhood. He reveals that his prized possession, a collection of 12 jade statues, each representing an animal from the zodiac calendar, were all stolen. As you play through the game, you come across these statues and return them to your sensei, getting a new melee skill with each one you deliver. Every time you return one, you're rewarded with a cutscene of a conversation between Wei and his sensei. These conversations are often philosophical in nature, expositing about the human condition and how we define ourselves, and they give a great amount of heart to the game. Wei Sensei knows that Wei is part of the Triads, and is very torn about giving him more tools that he can use to hurt people. At the same time, however, he senses that Wei is still a good person. And while Wei can't reveal that he's an undercover cop, they coyishly discuss it, as Wei seeks out moral guidance from his long-trusted sensei. This leads us into the real star of Sleeping Dogs, the combat. Where at the time Grand Theft Auto focused solely on gunplay, and the only melee was a quick dick punch in Saints Row III, Sleeping Dogs flips the script by focusing primarily on melee combat to the point where you don't even reliably see guns until you're almost a third of the way through the game. And even then, you never really just run around with a whole arsenal in your back pocket like you do in similar titles. But the melee combat here is very interesting in how it manages to be both approachably simple while feeling intense and cinematic. Most of your time fighting will be spent performing combo strings of light attacks finished with a heavy attack. It sounds simple, and it is, but the combos are the perfect example of easy to learn, somewhat difficult to master. Combining them together in different orders to maintain and overcome the increasing size of the hordes of gangsters you fight is incredibly satisfying. It makes combat like this
My shame at your grows by the minute. How can Wei learn?
feel a lot more like this. You probably noticed the counters in that footage as well. Sleeping Dogs uses the enemy's glow when attacking, so just press a button to counter that shit mechanic, from the Batman, Arkham, and Assassin's Creed series. However, this mechanic works much better with the combo system of Sleeping Dogs because it allows you to be more aggressive, rather than relying on the counters to initiate any offensive moves whatsoever. But one of the real standouts of the combat system are the environmental kills. While not wholly original, Sleeping Dogs implements them in a way that has them standing out as surprisingly brutal highlights in the fights. When playing through Sleeping Dogs, you're going to see a ton of these environmental kills. This is because of two reasons. One, you can grab most enemies and drag them over to an environmental kill area, no matter how much previous damage has been done to them, meaning that they're good, quick ways to dispatch of enemies. But two, they're just awesome. The level of brutality, variation, and great animations at play here makes seeing the opportunity for an environmental kill in the environment exciting every time. I mean, just look at these.
Damn, Wei! Fuck you!
Just Jesus. But eventually guns begin to play a larger role in the combat of the missions, and while the melee combat is never entirely gone, the gun combat does a commendable job as well. There are only a handful of guns you'll come across through the campaign. Two types of pistols, an assault rifle with either a flashlight or a grenade launcher on the bottom, a machine pistol, and a shotgun. Each gun has this weird chrome metallic aesthetic that really stands out from the visual design of the game, but it's not very distracting. And the shooting itself is relatively generic. You press a button to go into cover, can blind fire wildly, or hold a button to aim out of cover and take some shots. The only real unique addition here is that if you aim while mantling over cover, you go into a cinematic slow motion slide. The only issue with this mechanic is that they reduce the challenge of the shooting sections by encouraging you to just slide over cover after cover, taking down each enemy along the way with leisurely placed headshots. But the slow motion shooting does help add to the Kung Fu movie DNA that is critical to Sleeping Dogs' identity, and it pops up in other places too. There are a lot of design decisions here that are simply to make you feel like a badass, while also really setting Sleeping Dogs apart from its competitors. Shooting tires in car chases sends them flying into the air. You can jump out of cars while you have a gun to enter a slow motion dive, shooting at enemies as you fall. You can jump from vehicles to clamber on top of any other vehicle and easily hijack them. It all comes together to create a game world where you have numerous options for every situation, each one fun, cool, and easy to naturally stumble on. And the game world is another standout of Sleeping Dogs. Unsurprisingly, the world, part of an open world game, is extremely important. The best of the genre have fully realized worlds that are packed full of memorable areas and activities to interact with. This is a bit of a hit and miss for Sleeping Dogs, but the hits massively outweigh the misses. The game puts a strong foot forward right from the start with its setting. A modern Hong Kong is a perfect setting for a game like this. Plenty of variety between neighborhoods, winding streets lit by neon signs, and a grimy undertone to it all that matches the campaign's crime-centric nature. And the densely designed layout is a true blessing. While the sprawling, vacuous large maps of games such as GTA 5 or Skyrim have their pleasures to be found in exploring a wide-open, self-realized, and deeply thought-out universe, Sleeping Dogs' focus on narrative would have been done a disservice if it took 20 or 30 minutes to get from one mission to the next, ruining the story's tight pacing. To circumvent this, the map is much smaller than many of its counterparts. Being a square 1.85 miles, Sleeping Dogs is vastly smaller than Skyrim, and comes in smaller than even Saints Row the Third Steelport and Grand Theft Auto Vice City. But the true magic of this imagining of Hong Kong comes in how it utilizes its space. The city is split into 4 districts with a highway connecting them all in a tight ring. Each district has its own identity and feel to it, from the quality of the buildings to the street food being sold on the sidewalks and how nice of clothes you can buy from the stores. Navigating each district is a tangled mess of packed streets and alleyways and free running through cluttered pedestrian areas. The tightness of it all helps make the map feel packed with things to see and do, making it feel larger than it really is while still allowing the player to get wherever they need to go within a quick 5-minute drive. But all of this would be pointless if there wasn't anything to actually do in the city. There's shops to purchase clothes and vehicles from, apartments to unlock and customize through scattered one-off purchases, side missions, drug busts, collectibles, random events, street races, fight clubs, food vendors, and karaoke bars. The majority of this content is handled expertly. The shopping helps the city truly feel alive, and there's a lot of different options and stat bonuses that the player can decide between to choose how Wei is presented in the world. And the increasing quality of the clothing through the geographical progression of the story missions, as well as your leveling face meter, help give a tangible sense of progression through both the game and the Triad hierarchy. There's a great immersion to be found in buying a new suit, grabbing a teriyaki beef stick or pork bun to regenerate your health from the last mission, and walking through the cluttered night market, a chorus of callouts and side conversations surrounding you. The side missions also provide a healthy dose of variety to the gameplay. The street races are arcadey and a fun way to see the winding streets of the city, and can get pretty challenging depending on what streets they're using. Another highlight are the handful of dates that Wei goes on. While all but one of them are optional, they provide bonuses to make gathering the collectibles an attainable undertaking. There is something to be said for how uncomfortable it is that Wei goes on a date with each of these women once to unlock a new utility, and then they are never seen again except for one of them who gets a small side quest focused on Wei getting jealous about her seeing other guys, while the player has never seen her after the date and has more than likely gone on another date with a different girl, in a great dose of hypocrisy. And while that is sort of problematic looking at it now, it is more a relic of its time than any real threat of misogyny or poor use of women throughout the game. But the utility granted to the player from these dates provides a surprisingly large impact on their gameplay. Each date grants the player's minimap the ability to show a collectible type when the player is near it. There's lockboxes full of cash and unique clothing items, shrines that Wei can pray at to raise his maximum health, and cameras to hack to arrest drug dealers. Being able to see them on one's minimap adds them to the flow of the game, so that as you drive around Hong Kong and come across them, you can grab them quickly before continuing on. This is huge. Allowing the player to see the collectibles and tackle them early in the experience allows the upgrades the player gets from them to actually matter. Rather than waiting to get all of the collectibles when there's nothing else to do in the game, you slowly collect them over time, again reinforcing your progress and allowing you to actually use things like the increased maximum health or money that you gather during the missions and story. Unfortunately, it is the side quests, drug busts, and world events where things start to be less properly executed. There's a lot of repetition here that doesn't add anything to the game. You'll be mugged and have to chase down and beat up a thief countless times, drive a gang member away from the rival 18K gang over and over, provide sniper support in hostage situations until you're sick of seeing a scope, and catch store robbers and anticlimactic shootouts ad nauseum. The world events are similarly disappointing. The majority of them are nothing more than somebody stealing a purse, Wei chasing them down and kicking their ass before taking the purse for himself. They don't add anything to the game world, and more often than not, they feel much more like attempts at a brief distraction rather than a fleshed out mechanic. The drug busts are also a particular bore. They're a simple system. You go to a gang hangout area and beat everyone up before hacking a camera in an extremely easy minigame, and finally go back to your apartment where you use your TV to watch a drug deal and mark the supplier for police officers to awkwardly run in and arrest. The main issue here is how unengaging the system is for how much travel it requires. The locations aren't very compelling to fight in, with very little to no environmental opportunities, and most of them just being the same alleyway. The hacking minigame is pretty much impossible to fail, and once you get back to your apartment and use the TV identifying the supplier has a lot of wasted time, and can be circumvented by waiting 30 seconds, after which the game just places a marker over his head so that you know who to select. This is made even worse by how there are some cameras on the map that are hackable, but don't even have drug busts with them for some reason. There's no apparent reason to to hack these cameras except for getting true completion, but they make the entire system feel even more tacked on and poorly utilized. There's a few other of these minigames that are sprinkled throughout Sleeping Dogs. There's lockpicking, camera hacking, bug planting, signal triangulating, safe cracking, karaoke, poker mahjong, and even the controversial cockfighting. Most of them serve their purpose fine, and are pretty fun little activities that help add tension to timed missions or just shake up the gameplay. The main issues come with the camera hacking and safe cracking, but that is simply because of the frequency the player has to engage with them. The sparse use of the other mechanics maintain their shallow but engaging design, and the game uses them well to mix up the gameplay throughout. But that's it for the base game of Sleeping Dogs. It's a bit of an underrated gem, a unique take on a genre that has only gotten more popular since the game's release. While not all of its elements work completely, the focus on the game's great narrative and writing provides an experience that is as engaging as any in gaming. Combined with the focus on fun mechanics and cinematic presentation, Sleeping Dogs provides an open world experience that is at the very top of the genre, regardless of its smaller scope, and after completing it, there's a lot of inevitable optimism for what could be done in the subsequent DLC. So let's get into them.
The Gyeongsi come forth, an undead army at their beck and all of Hong Kong at their mercy.
That was the worst movie of all time. Who makes up this stuff?
Hey, Wei. Niece.
Alright, let's just get this over with. Nightmare in North Point released on October 30th, 2012 for $6.99. Sounds like a reasonable price, right? Well, just wait. Now, before we really get into this, I've got to say that I've played a lot of garbage DLC. I bought Horse Armor and the Mage's Tower and that one castle in Oblivion. I bought DLC in Dragon Age Origins through that dude that just sits in your camp like a passive-aggressive life insurance salesman. I played Mortal Kombat X with those weird easy fatalities. I didn't pre-order Mass Effect 3, so I had to buy From Ashes. And hell, I used to be super into Sims 2 and Sims 3 and bought a solid majority of both of their expansions and item packs back in the day. So it should carry some weight when I say that Nightmare on North Point is one of the worst DLC experiences that I have ever had. The DLC starts with a poster for a horror movie and some audio before we jumped away and one of the girlfriends from the main game, Not Ping, who is apparently dating Wei at this point. Wei and Not Ping make fun of the movie a bit and are scolded by Not Ping's apparent uncle, Old Salty Crab, a Sun On Yi enforcer that you do a quick mission with in the campaign. Old Salty Crab scolds them for mocking ghosts because...
Don't make fun of the Gyeongsi. Night like this, they might be on their way.
I think it's pretty obvious where this is going. So of course, right after he says that, literally seconds later, the ghost of an old Sun On Yi gangster mockingly known as Smiley Cat appears and kidnaps Not Ping. Not Ping is crucial to his plan to exact revenge on the Sun On Yi. In order to fully summon the underworld into the real world, he needs Not Ping to... There's not really any reason he takes her. He just kind of appears and kidnaps her, and then he runs away and you have to chase him. After you catch up to him and fight the new Jianxi enemy type, it's revealed that he has summoned back the ghosts of Dog Eyes, Johnny Ratface, and Ponytail to help him exact his revenge. All enemies from the main base game campaign. But before you get to them, Wei has to fight a demon that is in the backyard area of Mrs. Chu's Golden Koi restaurant. But Wei is unable to deal any damage to him because, well, he's a demon. So you run to a nearby tea maker who says that he can make you a tea that will allow you to fight the supernatural. You run around quickly and grab 3 ingredients, drink the tea that alters your face meter to light your fists on fire and allow you to damage the demons, while just generally increasing your damage. Wei goes back to the Golden Koi to kill the demon, and that unlocks a couple side activities as well as 2 main missions. We'll get into the side stuff later, so let's just keep going with the story. One of the missions is to go and kill the ghost of Dog Eyes, who is back in the fish factory that the player has fought through in the base game. You punch your way through Possessed 18K and some more of the Jianxi ghosts, and then throw him into the furnace, which kills him, I guess? The other main mission unlocked is Johnny Ratface, so you run over there to fight through some Possessed 18K and Jianxi ghosts before you kill him too. Then you go somewhere else in the North Point district to fight through some Possessed 18K and Jianxi ghost enemies at the Bang Bang Karaoke Club. Before killing Ratface, Wei asks him how to stop Smiley Cat and offers to simply send him back to hell as a reward rather than maiming him so that his spirit is stuck in the material world forever. Ponytail tells Wei that Smiley Cat has a finger at the temple in North Point that needs to be burned, so naturally the player heads there next, and Not Ping is being kept there for some reason. You fight some Possessed 18K and Jianxi ghosts. Is this sounding familiar yet? And then you beat up Smiley Cat, and that cues the final cutscene. Wei and Not Ping burn the finger, put some food on Vincent's grave, and then leave before Not Ping looks at the camera in a thriller freeze frame with possessed eyes. What? Who's Vincent? Oh, I completely forgot. When Wei first arrives at the Golden Koi, he runs into the ghost of a dead friend of Wei's, Vincent, who isn't in the base game at all, and I have no idea where the hell he comes from. He just sort of follows you around every once in a while at the start of the DLC before disappearing and just popping up again towards the end. The writing uses him to exposit for the player so that everyone can understand what is going on with all the ghosts and shit. But there's two real issues with this. The first issue is that most everything that he tells Wei is literally repeated by other characters, usually salty old crab. The second big issue is a larger one for the entire DLC. There's such a lack of memorable characters here. Of all the characters in the base game, we end up with a new villain we have no attachment to, a girlfriend from 2 missions that we have no attachment to, old salty crab that we only knew for a single mission, and then some jack-off small-bit Sun On Yee gangster that we never even met. Where are all of the great characters that we connected to in the base game? Why not have Dog Eyes be the main villain that comes back instead of Smiley Cat? Why not have Jackie or Winston Chu take the place of Vincent so that we actually enjoyed talking to the ghost? Why have not Peen and old salty crab in it at all? The choices for the characters make such little sense and end up being so boring and make it hard to invest in any of the story that's there. So now let's get to the side activities. There's only a handful because if you couldn't tell from the story synopsis, this DLC is ridiculously short. Like 2 hours tops short. So there's some side missions in quotation marks because there's really just running over to an area and beating up a group of enemies, as well as other groups of baddies that aren't side missions on the map, but function almost exactly the same. It's just more combat for the sake of combat, and it's really unfortunate that they didn't do anything very interesting with the concept of this DLC. There's also a new replacement for the Hell Shrine collectible in the form of 10 Hell Money Shrines. Collecting these shrines rather than increasing your maximum health, because you start the DLC with everything unlocked, they increase the chance that when you have a full face meter, your combos light an enemy on fire to deal constant damage. They're pretty much useless if I'm being honest, because the combat in this DLC is trivial. Having all of the upgrades is a fine idea, but it leads to having so much health that even fighting sloppily doesn't lead to much of a challenge. This is made even worse in how poor the design is of the 2 new enemy types. The Jianxi ghosts are the most prevalent, and they are just the worst. They attack slowly and rarely, so there's little countering, and they are very easy to counter. The Jianxi also don't block any attacks, so you just relentlessly combo one of them until they get dazed, before grappling to perform the same finisher animation every single time. About halfway through the DLC, they introduce a mechanic for portals that the Jianxi come from, requiring the player to throw 3 Jianxi into it to close the energy portal. Not a bad idea, but it is so easy to just grab 3 in a row and throw them in there that they become more of an inconvenience than anything else. The demons, on the other hand, aren't that bad, I guess. They can only be damaged with the full face meter, so each one is spawned with a small posse of Jianxi for Wei to pummel, get the flaming fists, and then beat up the demon real quick. Again, it becomes more of an inconvenience than an actually interesting game mechanic. If poor mechanic design isn't enough, the new enemies also give off the impression of how rushed and cheap this DLC feels. Not only is it painfully short, but the Jianxi have hardly any animation at all, to the point where they look like cheap glitches when they attack, rather than actually planned design decisions. And just how much you have to fight the same group of enemies over and over doesn't help anything either. Sure, you unlock some kind of cool new outfits that are themed to look like old Chinese warriors, but they make the combat even easier, as most of them increase your melee damage. It all just feels extremely low effort and undercooked. It is especially disappointing just how little this DLC delivers on the strong foundation of the base game. What really made the base game special was the excellent writing and tension-filled story. The kung fu fighting and fun mechanics were just bonuses that made it even more special. But those are the parts that this DLC doubles down on, despite not expanding the mechanics or interactions in the combat in any meaningful ways. And come on, 2 hours? Releasing for $5 on December 18th, 2012, the second DLC pack for Sleeping Dogs, the Zodiac Tournament, seemed like a pretty cool idea. Referencing old kung fu movies, Zodiac Tournament promised to be an enjoyable, cheeky romp, dropping Wei Shen into a high-stakes martial arts tournament where the combatants fight one another for the amusement of the richest elite in Asia. From the beginning, I was in love with this setup. Not only does it take advantage of Sleeping Dogs' excellent combat system, but it also is a fun nod to the game's core inspiration in those same kung fu movies. Because of how excited I honestly was for this DLC, I'm sad to say that it is terribly disappointing. In fact, it is disappointing to the point that I have hardly anything positive to say about the Zodiac Tournament at all. So let's just start with the little bit of goodness in this DLC, just to get it out of the way really quick. We're going to get into the story more later, but suffice it for now to say that the story is what you would expect. You go to an island, fight some vague dudes, each with their own little gimmicks until you beat a boss. The good parts of this DLC lie in those gimmicks. While they don't do anything especially interesting to expand the combat mechanics, their gimmicks are pretty fun and cool to fight against. The handful that you come across each focus on some part of the combat's mechanics and just really harps on it, with one grappling you to the ground constantly, another focusing on striking combos, and even a recreation of the drunken fist fighting technique that mixes up your usual flow of timing counters. It's unfortunate, however, that most of these gimmicks aren't as transformative as I would have hoped. For example, the grappling fighter ends up being nothing more than getting tackled to the ground and pressing a button to stand back up. Shit, I couldn't stop myself from getting negative, so let's just get into it then. As I was saying, the gimmicks of the different fighters are very disappointing in how little they end up mixing up the combat of the game. And this is an issue that runs deeply through the experience of the Zodiac Tournament. When you first arrive at the temple, there is a modicum of hope as you run to your right and find one of the new collectibles, a fire opal statue. Now, I will concede that these statues are better than the useless shrines in Nightmare and North Point, but they still botch it pretty bad. When you're first on the beach and you grab your first statue, a small message pops up on the screen saying that as you collect the statues, you'll unlock new moves for the Muay Thai and MMA outfits. You may think, what's this? New outfits with different moves that I can do while wearing them? What a wonderful way to add some depth to the combat, and ensure that the tournament won't just be me doing the same combat I've done for hours in the base game, in boring, uninspired arenas that don't offer me any interesting changes. To that thought, I'd say, wow, that's exactly what I thought, and you are wholly justified in having those hopes, but you're going to be really fucking disappointed. And that is because your greatest fears are real here, as you don't unlock these outfits until after you beat the DLC. Now sure, after you finish the DLC, you can equip these outfits and try them out, and the underwhelming grappling moves that you've unlocked. However, to that I say a big old fuck you, because chances are that you'll be playing this DLC after completing the base game, even if you get the special edition that comes with it bundled right away. You access the DLC by walking into an orange light on the coast in the map of the base game, which is different from the other main DLCs, which you just select at the menu, meaning that you can conceivably complete it at any time during your playthrough. However, until you return all of the Jade statues to your sensei, attempting to start the DLC will trigger a screen warning you that they recommend you upgrade your abilities more before attempting to fight your way through the tournament, meaning that the game itself is recommending that you play the DLC after completing the story, because you cannot get all the Jade statues until pretty much beating the story, at which point the two outfits and their associated combat changes that you've unlocked are effectively useless to you, because there aren't any more story missions for you to do. Sure, if there are some small side activities that you haven't completed yet, or if you just want to replay story missions for some reason, you can use them for that. But not only does that require you to want to achieve 100% completion, which is a minority of players within itself, but it also fundamentally devalues the experience of using the new abilities when you're just using them to complete a shopping list of side activities. This is all made even more disappointing when one considers just how much accessing these outfits at the start of the DLC would have benefited the experience. Not only would it actually mix up the combat mechanics in a way that is unique and makes sense in the setting of the DLC, but it also would have given the DLC something in its core body that actually mattered. The insultingly short 1 hour playtime of the DLC is spent doing 3 group fights that are all painstakingly simple against the same enemies you fought countless times in the base game. Then there's one more group fight that tries to mix things up with so-so results. Spoiler, you just throw 3 guys into gears at the start of the fight and then fight like normal. Then there's the boss fight where you fight a drunken fist master where the countering timing is off, which is admittedly cool, but he only has like 3 moves, so it takes maybe 45 seconds to adapt, and then the fight is so simple my dog could beat it. Much like Nightmare and North Point, Zodiac Tournament manages to make the combat boring by not expanding on it at all. Starting a DLC carries with it the burden of the new. The player expects something different and additive to the game, especially when the DLC has an interesting new setup or theme to it, as this one does. And sure, this DLC does introduce a new location with unique assets instead of slapping a hideous filter over the starting area of the game like Nightmare and North Point, but what does that matter when everything you actually engage with is so low effort, uninspiring, and familiar? And obviously, with how short and lazy I've already told you the gameplay of the DLC is, the story here is also just hot garbage. The introduction isn't bad, with a cheeky film grain-ridden mock movie introduction, but there isn't really any story at the start. You just go to the orange light, and that introduction plays, and then you're at the island. But there's so many unacknowledged questions here. How did Wei find out about the tournament? How did he get into it? The wiki says that he is sent there by Officer 10, but I don't recall seeing that anywhere in the game, and the only original character in this DLC is Wei, and he probably doesn't even have 20 lines in the whole thing. But so you go to the island and talk to some of the other contestants who are all written the same and are just cocky assholes. Then you meet Little Fu, a woman who claims to be the daughter of a man you helped in the night market that says she hopes she can someday repay you. The funny thing here, though, is that you don't even have to talk to her, so it is entirely possible to just run past her and never get that small story bit that they really wanted to give you because there's a shitty payoff coming up in a little bit here. So you run along a mountainside path to an arena and do a fight there. Then you unceremoniously run to a beach on the other side of the island, where you see Little Fu, who tells you to drink some tea, otherwise you'll lose. You drink it, and surprise, surprise, it's poison. So you fight off an ambush that comes to capitalize on your poison pretty easily. You go to the beach arena and do a fight against the grapple guy there while poisoned, and then another random competitor tells you to go get a flower to cure the poison. You go get it, and then you're in the finals. Now, just remember here, though, that you could have completely surpassed the talk with Little Fu, which would have resulted in you drinking the poison from some random worker lady, and the stupid little story twist payoff that they tried to set up that is worthless anyways, would have seemed even more random and dumb and unfulfilling, and that doesn't really matter, but it's just really strange and bad game design. But so anyways, you go get the flower, cure your poison, you're in the finals. So then you and 3 other contestants that have still survived go and beat up some dudes before the operator of the tournament, whose name the game said, but he was so boring and hardly relevant that I can't remember it, or be bothered to look it up while writing this, says that you and the remaining competitors have to fight to the death. No surprise there. You beat up your friends in air quotes, who I only call friends because the mission description calls them that, despite me not knowing any of their names and them looking like generic enemy models. And then you chase the tournament organizer back down the same mountainside path, but with annoying fucking flashbangs that make you stop every 30 seconds along the way now. Until you fight him, he offers you $25 million to let him go, and then you snap his bitch ass neck. That's it. There's like 3 cutscenes, some boring fights, and nothing clever, interesting, or even fun done with the DLC setting or concept. It's all just a frustratingly vanilla, boring hour of gameplay. But we've only got 1 more DLC left to go, so let's just get this over with. Year of the Snake released on August 14th, 2012, and it is the longest Sleeping Dogs DLC, coming in at a beefy 2.5 hours if you do all of the side activities. But it's also the best DLC, but as you've seen, that isn't really saying much at all. The story kicks off just before the Chinese New Year with Wei Shen being put on meter maid duty by Officer Tang because of how reckless he has been recently. Although it isn't at all clear where this DLC takes place in the timeline of the game. While doing routine work, Wei discovers a bomb planted in a square filled with people. Wei apprehends the suspects, and one of them tells him that they work for a cult led by the man Mr. Chu, who believes that the world will end at the start of the new year, and if the cult helps push the world towards it, they will be rewarded by going to heaven. The cultist freely giving the information without much prodding is awkward, and takes the player out of the story a bit. But don't worry, it happens a couple times, and it's as weird every single time. The story that follows has Wei stopping multiple bomb threats across all of Hong Kong, until New Year's Eve arrives, and he has to put down a riot started by the cult before driving out to a barge and arresting Mr. Chu, where it is ultimately revealed that, shocker, the world does not end on New Year's. Year of the Snake story is sufficient at best. It's unique from anything else that's been done in the game leading up to it, and it is a pretty cool concept. However, it doesn't completely live up to the potential. The missions have a decent enough level of variety, having Wei chasing down buses with bombs in the back, jumping from pier to pier at the docks in a firefight, and even a turret sequence riding on a boat. There's also a great progression of stakes and severity to the missions. While you start off arresting cultists that don't put up much of a fight, you move through large group fights and end up in multiple firefights with assault rifles and the new tear gas grenade launcher. But at the core of the story, it doesn't do very much. Not only is the introduction of the story awkward in how unclear it is where it takes place, but the conclusion is just woefully anticlimactic. After shooting your way through the barge, you simply open the door and arrest Mr. Chu without any fight or resistance. It would have been nice to have something even slightly resembling a boss fight, and the last cutscene hastily wraps everything up before just placing Wei back in the open world without any fanfare for the last piece of content ever for Sleeping Dogs. But the most saving grace of this DLC is that it really feels like Sleeping Dogs again. It doesn't have a hideous filter over all of the visuals or keep you contained in a small section of map. And it doesn't have you just running to places. and even brings back the minigames from the base campaign, making me realize just how odd their omission were in the previous DLCs. But this also comes with its own negatives. Each short mission is spaced out with very long drives across the entire map, feeling as though they were purposefully started on opposite corners from one another to bloat the playtime. There's also the bizarre handling of the player's upgrades. Nightmare Northpoint gave the player every upgrade in the base game, while Zodiac Tournament was part of the base game save file and allowed the player to simply use whatever upgrades they had at the time. In contrast, Year of the Snake doesn't give you any of your upgrades except for giving the player the full health upgrade so that they have 200% health, and also the police upgrade that just lets you hijack cars quickly. It's a very odd design decision that really tarnishes the experience of the DLC. Not only does the health trivialize the majority of the encounters, but the lack of your combos and upgrades results in you trying and failing to do moves that are ingrained in your mind and that you've been doing for dozens of hours by the time you make your way to this final DLC. In an attempt to counterweigh this, Year of the Snake has a handful of new additions with results all across the spectrum. Perhaps the best addition is the new missions requiring way to secure an area. After taking out a group of cultists, the player is tasked a couple of times with holding that area for a specified amount of time as waves of cultists throw themselves at the player. It adds a good dose of variety into the flow of the missions, and it helps make the DLC feel as though it's bringing something new to the table. There are also some new collectibles in the form of evidence bags, but they are spread out across the entire map and there are no unlocks for collecting them, so they end up being pointless and unappealing. Then there's also the tear gas grenade launcher that is given to the player during one of the final missions as the player quells a riot started by the cult. While adding a new weapon in the DLC is a great idea, as well as giving it to the player in the base game upon completing the DLC, the gun doesn't really work all that well. The majority of the cultists have gas masks, making it so that the smoke seems to have no effect other than impacting you when you attempt to run in to fight them. This results in the best way of using the gun to be just shooting the cultists with the grenades rather than shooting them for the tear gas. And while that provides for some good laughs, it clearly isn't how the gun was intended to be used. But regardless, Year of the Snake is easily the best DLC for Sleeping Dogs, while also being mediocre and woefully underdeveloped. Does that sound familiar at this point? In conclusion, Sleeping Dogs is a grossly underrated gem of the 360 PS3 generation. The base game by itself is a wonderfully crafted, honed, and unique video game that delivers a great story that is impossible to not become engrossed in. It's unfortunate that United Front Games had to close its doors after shuttering the sequel that was in pre-production. And it's even more unfortunate that the only other property that we'll likely ever see in this universe is that garbage mobile game that couldn't even make it out of beta. And while the DLCs were low budget, boring, and sometimes infuriating disappointments, the base game is easily worth the price of entry by itself. Thanks for watching.